So, oh my gosh, I was really honored when Brandon asked me to do this. I'm not a huge public speaker or a techie or any of those things. I'm so grateful that y'all are joining us today. And if you hear a really loud dog, I promise you we'll shut him up as quickly as possible. So the topic or the title to this talk was a new take on interventions. But if you look at the man behind the mask with the red bandana on, that would be Ken. And this is actually Ken Seeley's take on intervention, and even more so, the power of the family and the power of relationships and connection. Because I think often when we think about the idea of intervention, we think about we're going to take someone's car away, we're going to put their dog in the pound, we're going to never speak to them again, we're going to turn their phone off, and boom, boom, boom. And that's okay, because that may be where we end up. But what I've found through learning from my mentors, Ken and Eric Seeley, what I've learned is there is a lot of power in connection and in relationships. And we don't have to start off with a hammer. And I think at this point, we've all come to understand that families are so important in this process that if we're not involving them, we're doing them a disservice. So I'm going to get little Johnny ready and ship him off to the Rancho Dove Tree, and he's going to have a great experience in treatment. And he's going to come home to a family that is the same family he left, that hasn't learned about appropriate communication or healthy boundaries or what it means to be in a non-toxic relationship. They want to give him a brand new car because he completed treatment. And, you know, we have to honor that because he went to treatment to save his life. So we're going to go out and buy him a gosh darn big giant pickup truck and a Great Dane. I don't know. That's not really what they need. And if the family starts to do this work, and if we have the opportunity to educate them around codependency, educate them around their own relational power. I can tell you, I was out there for 3 decades, and there never came a time, at least in my life, you know, even kind of being out on the streets of the South Bronx. What I can tell you, and this was before cell phones, I never didn't speak to my family, and they never didn't speak to me. And that connection was always there. So at least in my experience, personally, and with most of the families that I've worked with, and I've worked with quite a few over the last 5 years, they've not gotten to the point where nobody's not talking with each other. So that means that there is a reward in there. And that reward doesn't have to be money, and it doesn't have to be material things. The reward is my family still loves me, so I can tell myself I'm okay. My family's still willing to talk to me, so things can't be that bad. And I still have that safety net that's flying around out there. So when you come into an intervention and we start talking to a family, you know, we want to identify who it is that is going to have trouble with what we might be starting to do. But I think even more important than that it's crucial to understand who it is on your team, right? Because we're creating this board of recovery that's going to support their loved one to beginning treatment. And inpatient treatment is only a beginning. It's the very smallest part of the beginning, but it's important, it's crucial, it's necessary, but all the follow-up work is too as well, and as well for the family. But we want to find out who in that group still has some depth and weight and credibility with the person that we're intervening on, because there's always someone that is really dialed into what's happening with them. There's also always this desperate attempt to keep the secrets. I don't want this person in my life. I'm the person that's struggling with substance use disorder. I don't want this person in my life. And let's say it's a coach, which actually that's really funny if you know me, because I've never had a coach of any sort. But if I had a coach and I really respected them, I may not want them to know to what level my addiction has taken me. And we become so used to, you know, playing these different roles. So just the idea that our secret is out, everybody knows what's happening behind closed doors. that alone is very powerful, because we all know that, you know, when we talk about stages of change, when we talk about, you know, does somebody have to hit rock bottom, and what does that look like, and where are they willing, and where are they entering? The one thing I know across the board is they don't want anybody knowing what they're doing. First of all, it's very difficult to continue, you know, dancing as fast as you can when the people that in your life know what's going on out there. So they can't, you know, you can't 20 them to death. You can't have access to their bank account. Maybe you can't come stay in their house because they know what's been going on. But that relationship is powerful. I think that's my point. That relationship is powerful. And I think it's way more powerful than physical things. Because I think that all of us innately believe that relationships will continue forever, particularly in our family. And I think oftentimes we go from one extreme to another. One extreme, we're completely enmeshed, we have no boundaries, I don't end where you begin. And then we have the other one is we've completely shut them down. We don't know how to engage them in conversation. We don't know how to help them. We're lost. And by the time either one of those families, wherever they fall on that scale, by the time that they've reached out to someone that's working with families or is looking to do an intervention, something has happened. Like, this hasn't just been going on for a little while. And something has happened within the last 36, 48, 72 hours that was a game changer. So I feel like when we get them in that beginning and they're vulnerable and they're in fear and they want direction, that really is the golden opportunity to start educating them and doing an assessment in your own mind around, okay, what's really happening here behind the scenes, apart from the person that is struggling with whatever substance, process addiction, whatever that is. And to figure out really quickly whether or not that family has the emotional wherewithal to do something that can be extremely powerful. It can be very emotional. It can be very volatile. And it's definitely one of those circumstances in life where you're either with us or you're against us, although no, they don't see it that way. But it's very important to find out who plays what role in that family system, because everybody has one, whether it's the hero, you know, whether it's, you know, mom, the martyr. That's what I had, because I'm Italian and I'm Roman Catholic. So I had a mother who was mom, the martyr. My sister was the perfect child. We all play these roles. And we've all agreed, spoken or unspoken, to keep secrets. And we've almost made an investment in keeping our loved one sick, because the greatest fear is that that person is never going to come home again, that phone call is going to come in the middle of the night. So that power, that's relationship power, that's love power, that's family power, because that's what keeps driving the codependent. So clearly those emotions are strong and they're valuable, and those connections mean a lot on both sides. And feeling, you know, when they make that phone call because something has happened within the last few days, the one thing they feel is powerless. That's what I hear all the time, and not in the 12-step idea, but they feel powerless and they feel helpless and they feel they're in despair and it's about them. This is my fault. And all of that self-browbeating has pummeled them to such a place where we've got to get them to where they're functioning, or this intervention is never going to work. We have to get them to a place where they understand that this is just the start. So I know I talk really fast. I apologize, but some of it is because I'm very, very nervous. I'm just going to be honest about that. I really am. Understanding where to start. So that's why in the model that I've been taught, the pre-intervention is so incredibly important, because like I said, I'm figuring out who plays what role. I'm figuring out who's going to be my ally. Who thinks this really needs to happen? Because they'll tell you they think it needs to happen. But when you get into that room and you start talking about what bottom lines might look like and what repercussions might look like, because that's what, you know, always ends up in a conversation, they find out really quickly, well, maybe I'm not so ready. Maybe this is not the way that I want to do this. So my job, I don't see interventions as pass-fail. I'm using a lot of graduation terminology today. Forgive me. It's my monkey is graduating high school tomorrow. So it's pass fail. Either we got the loved one off to treatment and it was a roaring success, or they didn't go to treatment and it was absolute failure. I don't believe that for at all, because even if that person doesn't agree to treatment, that family has now been exposed to the fact that they do have power, and it is in their relationship, it is in their connection, it is in their resiliency, it is in their love, it is in the dynamics of that family system, because this person is still there. So as long as they're there, we have something to work with. So even though they may not go to treatment the first time, and that's happened to me a couple of times, what I see frequently is they come back. They come back within a week. They kind of start to feel that everything's different. They're not getting phone calls from mom every day finding out if they ate their SpaghettiOs. They are realizing, hey, wait a minute, wait a sec, nobody's calling me. Nobody's coming after me. Nobody's bargaining with me. Nobody's negotiating with me. What is this? And it's extremely disorienting for someone that is so used to pulling the strings in their family system, that they utilize their love. I certainly did. Utilized my love and their love as ransom almost. And it was a type of emotional terrorism. That's what I was. I was an emotional terrorist. And I knew that they would always kind of knuckle under anytime they tried to get me to do something. And the way, when I really first saw this happen and make a lot of sense, was my family, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use myself as an example because it's the story I know best. God bless Scott Weisenbaker. So my mother had reached out to a woman she had met and took her card to get a haircut, and actually called her 3 years later because she was finding syringes in my house. And I told her she would find those little orange caps, and I would tell her those were Lego pieces, but she didn't believe me anymore. And she reached out to a friend and made a phone call and found this business card. And I guess I talked to somebody, and you know, Scott was sitting at my dining room table the next morning at 7 a.m. And the way that happened was he challenged my mother about why she permitted me to use drugs in her house. And Miss Connie did not like that one bit. And she was like, you know, Sicilian, I told you, remember, did not like that, got very angry. But, you know, he asked the question, well, you called us because you found what? And she said, a needle. Okay, and where's your daughter right now? And my mother's like, she's asleep. It was just matter of fact. She did not understand until he kind of looked at her and said, you're allowing her to use drugs in your home. So the families don't get it. It's not always this willful ignorance. They really just, you know, nobody has taught them how to deal with this individual. So that becomes part of our job, and connecting them with the resources that they need. And, you know, whether that be individual therapy, whether that be family therapy, whether we just get them in front of a clinician for assessments, because I am not a clinician, so that's way above my pay grade, to find out what the next best step for them is, instead of kind of selling them a dream and this is going to be great, when I know just from listening to them, it's all going to fall apart the second it starts. So moving that family to a point of wellness, and look, that's not going to happen overnight, but to at least know that there's an option. If they get connected with community-based fellowships, if they start talking about self-care and practicing self-care, you know, maybe they're severely codependent and maybe they need to go spend some time at the guest house, or they have to go spend some time at, you know, on site, where they can get some residential work around their codependency. Whatever the case, that has to be addressed and dealt with, because once you get in that room to do that intervention, it really does just start with, we're terrified, we love you so much, and we don't want you to die. It doesn't start with, go to treatment right now, or I'm taking away your key of soul. That's not where we begin. And what I found is that when we can maintain a level of emotional distance, but maintain that sincerity when we're in that room, it isn't the yelling and the feet stomping that gets their attention. It's the sincere, honest, genuine sharing of how terrified their family is, but they've not been able to vocalize it in a way to them prior, or maybe they have, but not at the right time or not in the right way, or, you know, the other loved one, the impacted loved one might have leverage over the family. But when they start working on the power of those bonds. So when we talk about the pre-intervention being so important, is because that is absolutely the time where we have an opportunity, we have the full attention of the family before this big distraction comes blazing through the door, which is their loved one that's struggling, to give them some guidance, to answer their questions, to assure them that this is nothing they have created, to let them know, like, no, it isn't because you smoked a joint when you were 7 months pregnant and watched way too much TV. This is not your fault. This is who your child is for whatever reason. And we could talk about physiology and all of that. But helping them understand that they're not hopeless and they're not powerless and they don't have to be in despair, that they can do some work that will allow them to be at peace regardless of what their loved one does. And if they do that, kind of going back to what I said in the beginning, it's not a black or white, yes or no. It's the family's starting to get better. So how do we call that a failure? We have a family now that maybe this loved one that didn't say yes, but a family that as a group that is working together and holding each other accountable around availing themselves of aftercare, to make sure that they are communicating and that they're talking about the commitments that they've made. Because when I do interventions, it's not just about the commitments that the loved one has to make. And we're not going into that room pointing a finger. This is a family system issue. This is something where everybody's going to have to do some work to get well. So if they continue doing that and they continue working with either a coach or a case manager or what have you to continue growing for their own benefit, when their loved one comes back and they're like, okay, I'm ready, then they can say, okay, you know what? So am I. I'm ready. I'm ready. And I'm in a better place. So I don't ever understand how anybody sees that as a failure. Sometimes the best that we can do is just plant a seed, and hope the family follows direction and continues on with us on that path. I feel like I've been talking for 40 minutes, but I've only been talking for 14. Once somebody goes to treatment, I think that families, you know, they have family programming, which is wonderful, but they're not going to get, and we all know this, we do the best we can with what we have, but within those 4 days, we're not going to fix everything that's going on within that dynamic. We won't even potentially have enough time to really educate them around substance use disorder in a meaningful way. So when I initially said, you know, treatment is a very important part, it's a foundational part, but it's a very small part. Keeping that family engaged so that their loved one continues to step down through levels of care, whether that includes transitional housing, whether that includes IOP, PHP, a mental health-driven PHP. I'm very blessed to be able to work with some special networks where I live. And what is amazing to me is that for a long time, they wouldn't work with substance use disorder because they did not see it as a mental health issue. I'm very glad to say that's no longer the case. But we put people in treatment, they come home, and it isn't, you know, a generalization brushstroke about what's right for everybody, and the family has to be a part of that decision. Letting them understand that they have the right to say no, making sure that they understand that they don't have to, because we're only 28 days later in some circumstances, right? So not a whole lot has begun to happen. I mean, this is, you know, their brain's getting healthy. They can begin to start asking the right questions, but it's a very short amount of time. So they may come out of discharge planning, you know, with the idea that they're going to go to Colorado and plant a bunch of, you know, plants and sell some weed to the country. That's their plan. They're going to go run a pot farm. That's great. You can do that, but I'm not paying for you to do that. I'm not going to get you there. We as a family are not going to support a plan that we disagree with, and we don't have to. No is a complete sentence, and it's a gift. No is a gift, and here's the gift of no. So you can go on and do what you want to, but getting that family to the place where they understand that they can do that, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the power of the family. It's palpable, and it's visceral, and somewhere deep in the belly of everybody, that need and that desire for that relationship exists. And if we can access that and use that, so it doesn't be, we don't need to re-traumatize our clients to have an effective intervention, or to come away with it slapping ourselves on the back. That, to me, that's just not ever where we start, and I don't like when we have to get there. That need exists for everybody. It exists for everybody, except if you're dealing with someone who's chronically homeless, who has made a conscious decision to stay away from the family, not because the family said no, but because they emotionally cannot deal with being a part of that system. It feels very restrictive, or for whatever reason, and now they've joined the lines of the chronically homeless. Well, where's your leverage? What do you do now? We go find this young man, old man, young woman, young, old woman. We take them off the street. Do you think they're going to care if, they don't have a car? They might have a phone, but they don't have a car, and they don't have a house, and they're subsisting on, in their mind, their life makes sense. So if they're continuing that relationship in the family, once again, so there's that connection. That's what you can utilize. If there is none, then you're right. Then that's a humdinger. If they have no communication with everybody and we can't find them, they've made a decision to exit themselves from that relationship. But I've been really surprised by people that are on the street, that make sure that they call their mother twice a week and let them know that they're okay. That may be all that you have, because nothing else means anything to them. So when their loved one is getting ready to come out of treatment, and we can do all the great things, go to Alcoholics Anonymous, call your sponsor, do all that great stuff. If they're following a 12-step ideology, we want to make sure that you're attending your IOP. We want to make sure that we're doing UAs, that we're drug testing you, that we're in communication with you every day. And when the family wraps themselves around that idea, and when the family wraps themselves around the idea that they're going to have their own treatment plan, the things that they need to do, and that they're all in this together, it's amazing to see what they can come together to make happen. I had a family where the mom was knowingly driving her son down to Dallas to get heroin because she physically and emotionally could not bear to see him suffer. And I get that. I don't even want to think about how many times I know I've been to treatment like 28 times, like it falls in there somewhere, but how many times that I've had to kick cold turkey. But this is an educated woman, master's level education, driving her son into the city to buy dope. So if we can get that mom moving in a different trajectory, because she'll be okay with him going to detox and going to treatment. She might not be okay if I suggest Families Anonymous or an LMFT, or things that she needs to begin to work on, because while their loved one is in treatment, their loved one is expected to come back to exactly the same family that they left, and they know how to work that game, and they know how to pluck those strings. So as that family moves forward in their own treatment experience and changing their own boundaries, when that loved one comes home, they're dealing with something formidable, which is an educated, free, getting healthy, because they're not going to be perfectly healthy in 4 weeks. I certainly wasn't, but they're getting healthy, and they're not keeping the secrets anymore, and they're all right with saying no, and they're all right from withholding resources. So, the conversation then becomes, yes, you're an adult, you can do what you want to do, but you're going to do it. We're not going to support it. And that type of power, you just can't underestimate it. It doesn't always have to be a hammer. It can be love and experience and relationships. And we want to keep them engaged. We want to keep them engaged all the way through IOP. We want to follow that family for as long as we can so that they are supported. And, that's with the families that I work with, it isn't this, intervention and then you disappear. I'm with them in it for up to a year, one family 2 years, and I'm never not going to be involved with them. And they know that there's resources because things happen. And we are notoriously difficult to treat. And unfortunately, relapse does not need to be a part of recovery, but oftentimes it is. It certainly was for me. So knowing that they have someone that's in their corner that's not going to judge them, but is going to hold them accountable and is going to give them some guidance, so that if there is a relapse that happens in there while they're still kind of in this outpatient circle and doing meetings, we can like put the fire out before it consumes the whole building. And that's by everyone talking to each other and understanding what's going on. And, HIPAA sometimes can really get in the way of that. So part of the agreement is that you have to keep a workable release of information in place for me to have free and unrestricted communication with your therapist, your psychiatrist, your counselor, whoever that is, so that we can close those loopholes that I think a lot of us use in early recovery, which is selective honesty. I decide who needs to know and on what basis. So by being in the middle of all that with the family, you remove that power of their loved one to be secretive. And yeah, it's a lot of support. It's a lot of follow-up. There's a lot of connection there. But what I'm seeing with people, with families that move through this process, it absolutely blows my mind away. And how quickly they can begin to do things differently and move forward. And, and again, there's always the chance that loved one is going to say no. Sadly, it happens. But that family doesn't have to say no, and they don't have to stay sick, and they don't need to, worry the skin off their hands at night or pull the hair out of their heads, giving them other options, where I utilize all of you wonderful people that have credentials that I don't have. And I know when it's time to say, okay, we have to get this addressed and taken care of. Brandon, I wasn't sure how long.
We have the whole hour to continue on. If you want to continue on, we have until 1 o'clock. Maybe if anyone has any questions, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask a question, or put the question in the chat box. Maybe you could also, Jan, talk about if the said parents are not on the same page of the child that needs to go to treatment, and what that looks like.
Okay, so in terms of not being on the same page with each other? Okay.
Yes,
and that happens 90% of the time. And that goes back to this pre-intervention and all of this work that we do. I work with a family for at least 2 weeks before we get in front of their loved one when I can. So some of that will be about education or using a little bit of motivational interviewing, where we're talking about, I hear what you're saying this, but your goal is to get your son to treatment, but you won't stop running over and giving him money. So, and he doesn't work. So tell me how that lines up with what your goal is. And then allowing the person, because the person that's ready for them to go to treatment is always the more vocal one, and they're angry. Anger is powerful. I mean, underneath that is disappointment and sadness, and we know all of that, but they're the ones that are not afraid to speak up because they are done. They are done. And the person that's not ready for their loved one to go to treatment is one that's saying, yeah, but, and really, they need to do this for a year, and gosh, they're gonna be a burning tree for how long? Or, that's crazy, and, I just send them to Lubbock. Why would anybody ever want to go to Lubbock? They'll just come up with any reason to disagree with that process. And that's, and what I try to explain to them is that their loved one has known that split has been there forever. And they play that to a T when that family cannot be unified. So way before, and I had a case like this that I talked to Eric about, and I actually told them, I'm not doing this with you. I turned down the intervention. I felt like I would be causing more harm then good. So ethically for me, that's just not something that I ever want to do. What I asked them to do was to engage the services of a therapist. And I gave them a bunch of names, and I told them to give me a call in 6 weeks or sooner, but that I wasn't going to take their check and I wasn't going to move forward, because if that intervention had failed, they would never have been able to attempt it again. That family was in that place. So encouraging them to have a conversation that isn't about accusation, that isn't about this is your fault and your second cousin twice removed took way too much acid in 1973 and now my son's jacked up. Like, that's all blah. But if we can get them to a place where they can really understand that all of that is fear-based. I mean, at least the most of what I see, that there's been, we talk about trauma, big T, little t, whatever T. At some point in their life, they felt threatened and they didn't feel safe. When they look at their child, they feel threatened and they don't feel safe. That worry is making them respond a certain way. So oftentimes, like I said, that one response is anger and the other one is, well, kind of. And I think it's important to let families understand that by continuing to engage in that type of relationship and filling those roles, because they're very traditional roles, we see them all the time, that they're actually increasing the potential for what they fear most to come true. If you two can't get it together and mom keeps throwing them out and you keep putting the key under the mat, that was my family. Connie threw me out. She was done. She's like, go sleep in the courtyard. I don't give a crap. Go sleep and hit the bricks. That's my family. And then there's my father, who would leave blankets and a pillow on the stoop. Well, we don't have stoops in Texas. We have stoops in New York, right, Ken? So he would leave it on the stoop, so at least I wouldn't be cold. I mean, this went on for, like I said, decades. And I think when they were able to see that what they were doing all those years, and it was never with the intention to harm, but what they were doing when they were doing the best they could with what they knew, I stayed out there that much longer because I always had leverage. I always had a safety net, and I knew they could not say no to me. And when I had a child, it was even worse, because the big threat, yeah, I'll go. You want me to go? I'm taking him with me. He goes, I go. Because they didn't know that they could pick up the phone and call 911 and say, hey, guess what? My daughter, who's a junkie, is walking out of my house with my grandson. She's getting in a car. Here's the license plate number, and she's under the influence. Case closed. Problem solved. If that had happened, potentially, had that conversation been had, I don't want to say how many years ago, because I just keep telling people I'm 20. But if they had had that conversation a really long time ago, and that there was someone to help them, to kind of show them the way and to understand that they were not victims in this, they were choosing to be victims in this, that the outcome would have been very different. And that's part of why it was different this last time, because I knew that at my age, I don't even go outside from May to September in Texas. So I just don't do it. I hate it. There's no way I'm going to go live on the streets in Dallas. I'm not going to go be homeless in a place that I don't know. But someone has to lead the way with that, because there's a disconnect between that mother and that father, or those two loved ones, where they can't get to a place of unity. And beyond that, not only that they're not in unity, there's a difference of not being in sync versus what's the word that I'm looking for? But then there comes a level of animus to that, where it's not just about, we don't just disagree, and this isn't about this issue that you're not okay. Then it becomes about the person. This is because you're this. This is because you're that. So bringing them to the table and helping them see how allowing that dissonance to continue is allowing the person that you want to get well so desperately that you can taste it. It's actually it's a block. It's a huge block. So that was the case with that family that Eric helped me out with. And, I very strongly believe that if I have any concern whatsoever that moving forward with that process is going to cause harm, that it's a dangerous situation and it's going to make it worse, that the family is so sick that something, just kind of get this feeling where something's going to be terrible. Um, give them a gift. Give them a gift of some referrals to get some help, and let them call me in a month or two. You know, the world's not going to end in a month or two. Well, I don't know. Basically, I don't think the world's going to end in a month or two. Give them the time they need, and they'll come back and keep checking back in with you. Just keep checking back in with them. They'll get there. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Jan. I appreciate that. And then I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody? Oh, I'm working on a case right now where dad told mom that if she kicks his son out, that he's leaving the house with him. So he's enabling the son so greatly that he's about to love him to death, literally.
Absolutely. And sometimes that has to be what happens, depending on where, you know, they just may be so completely resistant to the process that they're going to, because they feel like they're doing the right thing, and they think the decision they're making is noble, and they're standing on that nobility. There's a couple things I would ask. I would say, are there other children in the household? Because if I'm the wife, I might have to say, yeah, why don't you do that? Because I'm not going to expose the rest of the children in this house to that anymore. I'm not going to put them in jeopardy anymore. There would have to be a conversation with that dad that is free of blame, shame, accusation, to just ask him questions. That's what I would do. I would begin to ask him what his thought process was around that. You've contacted Michelle, this wonderful professional. You're asking for help, but now you're going to dictate what the help looks like. So help me understand how this is getting you to where you want to be, which is that you don't find your son dead in the bathroom with a needle in his arm, or out drinking and driving and wrapped around a telephone pole. If you've been in the house with him all this time and he's still been drinking or using, clearly your presence alone, as much as you might want it to, is not enough to keep Jack sober, to keep Jack clean, and to help him see again how over the long term what he's doing is again increasing the likelihood that the one thing he desperately doesn't want is exactly what he's going to get. And I would never even think about doing an intervention in that setting. I would get them, you know, in front of a therapist right away. And if he wasn't willing to do it, I've had times where I've asked dads or brothers, I've asked them to leave the room because they were getting in our way. We're trying to save somebody's life, and their disagreement or their anger, or they were so angry at the person we're trying to work with that they couldn't physically hold it. It becomes like visceral, and they can't stop, so we ask them to get up and leave. I've also asked people when, you know, we'll meet up if we're going to do the intervention at the identified patient's home, then we'll meet up in a parking lot like a mile away, so we all show up like this big, huge, happy recovery caravan. And I'll check in with that group before we head to the house. Who's in fear about this right now? How are you all doing? I'm gonna take the temperature in that group. And if there's someone, and there was at that point that was angry that we were doing this, and even though they went through the pre-intervention, they wrote their letters, I did my in-depth interview with them, done some role playing. When push came to shove, she disagreed with it and she was really angry, and I asked her not to be a part of it. I could do the same thing with a parent, and then the question becomes, well, why isn't he here? And that's painful, but that's also the other spouse's opportunity to say, because they have some work that they need to do as well. And today is about you. Today's not about them. We're gonna get dad sorted. We're gonna get him some support, but today is about you.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Sure. I'm sorry. I can't talk for an hour. I'm so sorry. I mean, I probably could. Ken and Eric are laughing. So is Missy. I probably could, but you wouldn't want me to.
No, Jan, you have been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me, Brandon.
Very informative. Thank you so much. I don't know if anybody else has any questions that they'd like to ask.
Actually, posted the question in the chat, but I'll read it out loud. I'm a school counselor in elementary school, and I kind of like want to hear what you would suggest for approaching the idea of treatment for substance abuse for like the parents of my kids.
So you're concerned about, sorry, so the concern is with an elementary age child, and you're thinking that one of the parents are using or that a sibling is using?
Sometimes as siblings, sometimes as parents.
Okay, that's a tough one. And I would absolutely, depending on where you are, reach out to, if a school called me and that was the situation, I bring in the big guns, because I think it's important to partner with a clinician at that point, because when you're dealing with children that young, they've already told themselves a story about what's happening in their home. They've created a narrative in their head that, mommy, daddy, brother, sister, that whatever they're doing is because they're not a good kid, because they're not right enough, because they're inherently wrong. And, that's, why getting these like younger children that are in these family systems, getting them services is so incredibly crucial, whether they're 5, whether they're 7, whether they're 16. So I think at that point, depending on how, so if this child approached you and said, this is what's going on, because I think it would probably come out more unintentionally through like a slip of the, not a slip of the lip, but you know what I'm saying? Like they said something that was a little odd, or they approached you because they were sad or upset about something, is to encourage them to put it in their language, to let them explain it in a way that makes sense for them and works for them. And I would have, we used to have these things called Rolodexes. We don't have them anymore. You wouldn't remember them, but have your Rolodex loaded with numbers of local providers, local therapists that specialize in pediatrics. When I had children that young, I will tug on one of my colleagues, because I want to be so careful about the message that I send, to really understand how they're receiving that message, because they may receive a message I never sent. So have to have permission from the family to chat with them, engage a pediatric that specializes in pediatrics, who is a therapist, and let them put it in their own words and try to suss it out. But you're also in a position, because you're a mandated reporter, right?
Yep.
So there you go. You're, a lot of that choice is taken from you, because the reality, and then it's like, oh my gosh, do I want to, now I have to involve CPS, which in and of itself, I work with so many CPS families and children that have been removed and reunited 3-4 times. And it's just heartbreaking to watch, but you don't really have a choice. You need to let them know. They have to know that something's going on, because if you have someone that's drinking or using too much in that family, that child is at risk for a number of reasons. So, and that's not to let you off the hook or let me off the hook with your question, but I mean, that's just true. You have to report, and build relationships with therapists locally. Understand about when, it's a CPS deal. Let them tell you their story with their own narrative, because it's going to give you a much better idea of how they really see and feel about this. And then, if they're not safe and whatever's going on, then you just got to bring out the big guns to keep that child safe.
Thank you.
It's important. We're very lucky our school system is LISD, and we have Kathy O'Keefe, who is, she runs a charity called Winning the Fight, and it's for families that have lost loved ones, like young adults, emerging adults, or teenagers to addiction. She is a resource. That woman has boundless energy. She's always going out and talking with the schools. She's worked with children before. I have, the wonderful Kyle Pillen. I mean, she's amazing with children. I can always look out and talk and research.
Layla, where are you located? I know you've been on a couple of days. You're in Louisiana, right?
I am in Louisiana.
Yeah. Yeah, I would absolutely pair up, even with Jessica that was on the Lunch and Learn last week,
Yeah.
on some of those issues.
I'm actually good friends with one of the therapists at her, I can't think of what to call it right.
At her
Yeah,
practice.
at her practice. So, and I'm also a PLPC myself, and so underneath supervision. So I actually have a lot of people that I can pick the brains of, which is nice.
Right. Yeah, and you have all of us now that can be resources for you. So we are happy to help you in any of those endeavors.
I'm super clear about my lanes, and I stay well within it. And I know when I need to bring other people in, and that's the best advice I can give. As you know, and clearly you're one of them. Reach out for sure.
Jan, you did a fabulous job today. Thank you so much. We have a lot of other folks on here with a lot of experience too. I saw Ken was a little bit earlier. Is there anything anyone else would like to add or share, or any other questions? I know Jan was tired there for a second, but you got a second wind there with that question.
Hey, it's Lauren in Austin. It's nice to see all y'all today. Katie, I haven't seen you in a long time.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
All right.
Ken, y'all want to chime in at all?
Yeah, no, a great job. Loved it. And I loved how you talked about, treatment as a little window, and, we hear you talk about your sober living, because really that's where the miracle happens. Treatment, the light bulb might go on, but the miracles happen in long-term care. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, so I think the data that we talk about in CCMI, which is the certification that I did with the late John Southworth, beloved John Southworth, and Ken and Eric, what the model is showing you want to try and keep that family, that loved one engaged for not 1 year, not 2 years, but they're talking 3 to 5 years to get those numbers up to close to where the numbers that we're seeing for pilots or for TPAPN or for FADAP or Physicians Health. They have their feet kind of held to the fire for a good 5 years with a ton of structure if they ever want to practice again or if they ever want to fly again. So if we can duplicate that process in CCMI, we do, and the family is a part of that. They're all going through this experience together. It's because everybody's holding everybody else accountable. I'm kind of like the hub of the wheel, and then you have all those spikes. All of those spikes are members of their recovery team and their providers, and I'm just the hub of information, and I'm making sure that everybody's engaged. So, if there is a misstep, we're gonna jump on it really quickly. But I've even heard it said in rooms before that you have to be sober for like 5 years before you get your head out of your butt. I've been told that. So yeah, I think keeping people engaged as long as we can is really important. The longer they are, the more, just from a physical standpoint, the more that their receptors, begin to heal and the synapses begin to heal. And, if we can work with them when we get through post-acute withdrawal, which can go on for a really long time, as much support as we can provide, we should.
I can't wait to get out and see your sober living.
Oh,
Me either.
These are the curtains. These are the curtains of my sober living. Yes, we have a sober living that is working. Also, it's not just sober living. So we're working with more significant co-occurring and secondary process addictions that can be difficult to place, like ED or gambling or sex love addiction. And we're also working with a population that has more significant co-occurring. So if someone has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and that diagnosis didn't happen after 3 weeks of smoking meth and it has some credibility to it, oftentimes that can preclude someone from going into sober living because they're notoriously med compliant or not med compliant. And I do serve on the mental health court here where I live. I wanted to create a space where they can go to treatment and come back and experience the same step down through levels of care that our garden varieties get to do. So we're just we customize, we create plans that make sense for them. It's everybody doesn't need the same thing.
Yeah, and Jan, they don't have to have a substance use disorder, right? Like it could just be like mental health.
Oh no, there has to be a substance use issue.
There has to be. Okay,
Yes.
got it.
Yes, and we're combining where if people have chosen medication as a pathway to recovery, okay. Look, if it's keeping people alive, I need to change my ideas. It's not about me, it's about them. And I've buried so many kids in the last 7 years. I'm just not doing it. I'm not going to be a part of that thought process anymore. So I know what worked for me and how I got well. People coming out of treatment, if they're being encouraged to utilize, and medication-assisted treatment includes Zoloft. I mean, it's all medication-assisted treatment. It's just, people get nervous about talking about the S words. If that's what that treatment center is recommending, I have no business chiming in on that. And just going to make sure we stay in touch with their provider. We had somebody come in that once they got here, they decided that they wanted to investigate medication-assisted recovery. And if someone is taking that path, they have to be under the care of a local physician. They have to be in clinical services, and they have to be in IOP to do that, to take those meds here.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jan. I think that, and this is Eric McLaughlin with Intervention 911 and Ken Seeley Community out in Palm Springs, California. It's really nice to see all you Dallas folk or Texas folk or Louisiana folk, Southern folk. We're excited. We're going to be in Dallas. We're going to be in Dallas in September, so for sure, and hopefully we'll be able to get there earlier to see you guys. But, I really appreciate the comments about the MAT. I think it's vital. It's something we've seen to be critical to long-term success, and the fact that we can come from a different perspective or background for ourselves and still bring that out. And I think that we create a lot of wins for our clients when we think like that, not about what worked best for me, but what works best for them. And we can still do our scope of practice in that, which is exciting. So thanks for bringing that up. Love you.
Love you too. I wouldn't look anything I've said today without those two gentlemen. I'd still be very miserable someplace by myself. Well, not by myself, but I'd still be very miserable. And there's nothing that I know that they didn't teach me. So call them.
Well, I will say having those guys jump on here absolutely shows the support for you. And the response for this lunch and learn shows your character, Jan. So we really appreciate you being here and doing this for us today. And we thank all those that were able to join us. We want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I know some people had to jump off. Jan, if you haven't looked in the chat, because I know you've been talking, you might want to check out the chat before you leave, in case you need a ego boost. You got lots of Jan's is awesome. You're a powerhouse in there. So check those out and get a little feel goods. But thank you all so much for coming. Those of you coming to Dallas or West Texas, we'd love to connect with you. Make sure you leave your contact information in the chat before you leave today. This video will be up on our little YouTube channel for those of you interested in seeing the full thing again, along with all the others that we've recorded throughout this series. And next week we'll have another presenter on this same time, same place. So thanks again, Jan. We really appreciate you being with us today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan. Very good.
Thank you.
Love to have you.
Thanks everyone for
Good
coming.
job.
Bye.
Love you.
Bye. Thank you.